Welcome to Kit's Myths and Mysteries, listened to in all 50 states and 39 countries. I'm your host, Kit Crum. Join me as I examine stories of the strange and unexplained that have occurred in a world you thought you knew. Today, the third installment of Where Did Billy Go? This is the story of an 11-year-old boy who vanished from just outside Tucson, Arizona while performing in front of 22 adult witnesses on his Stingray bike. He was discovered 72 hours later wandering across a Civil War battlefield 1,500 miles distant in southwestern Tennessee. The site was the Shiloh National Military Park. He was discovered by a tourist taking a tour who identified a distant figure as looking like a child limping along. More on this in a minute. It all started when I was scouring some 37-year-old FBI files I hadn't looked at in a long time, hoping to find something intriguing when I noticed under the child abduction section the case involving a young boy. He'd been abducted in 1982 from his Arizona residence and located in southwestern Tennessee, wandering in a state park with a slight limp. 3 days later. What caught my eye is that this wasn't marked as a kidnapping, and there was no ransom call. The FBI were brought in when the child was discovered not in a home state, but in another state. Typical. I managed to get my hands on a heavily redacted police report. Anything this old has been archived and is available on a special website that I have access to. Anyway, the report related how the victim and 4 other children were in a field performing jumps and bike tricks on their Stingray bicycles. Remember, this was in the 80s. The report described that the children had built a ramp and each would perform a jump over a stack of tires. 12 tourists visiting the nearby town of Oatman, Arizona, and 22 residents, including the children's parents, were in attendance, seated on homemade bleachers. The victim was the last to make the jump. His bike crashed on the other side of the tires, but he had vanished. Before I go any further, you need to know that police and FBI reports made available to the public and investigators like myself are cryptic, to say the least, heavily abbreviated and redacted, especially when a child is involved. Often there are more blackened lines than there are complete sentences. I contacted as many residents of what is virtually the ghost town of Oatman, Arizona, as I could. Of 12 phone calls and several emails, I had one hit. After 15 minutes of small talk, Mrs. Jones said she remembered the incident written up and said the boy's name was Billy something. I promised not to use her name. That's why Mrs. Jones. She also confided that I should talk to William Howard, who she thought saw the boy vanish. Another couple phone calls, and I located Mr. Howard in an assisted living center just outside Apache Junction, Arizona. He was 94, but very alert, and after much probing was able to remember Billy's name. Falstaff, he said, like the beer. After contacting the county sheriff department of the office of the FBI located in Phoenix and coming up empty, my next move was to contact the folks that oversee the tours of the Shiloh State Military Park in Tennessee, where Billy had been found. Again, nothing. No other ideas. I reluctantly decided to bag the story. 4 days after making that decision, I received an email from Escondido, California, wanting to know how my investigation into Billy Falstaff was going. The email came from a woman whose father had just passed away. 2 events prompted her to contact me. First, at the funeral of her father were several reenactors of the Battle of Shiloh who were on tour when Billy was spotted, and they had heard about my inquiries and related them to her. Second, while going through her father's notes, files, and journals, she discovered that he was the doctor that treated Billy. At this, I assumed that the boy might have been in shock and was treated for shock, and said rather than emailed as much. Her response knocked me out of my chair. Her father had removed a Civil War-era mini ball from the boy's upper thigh. I emailed back asking if she meant bullet. Her response was an emphatic no. It was a mini ball, and she had found it wrapped in wax paper stapled at the top of a journal explaining the injury. I asked if she could take a picture of the journal and the mini ball and send it to me as an attachment, and she did. This kept me going. This was just getting better and better. I punched Billy's age into my calculator and added the elapsed 37 years from 1982 to 2019 to come up with his current age of 48, but stopped short of putting the calculator away. He vanished April 6, 1982, exactly to the day, April 6, 1862, 120 years since the Battle of Shiloh. Okay, I had to find Billy. Assuming he'd been taken back to Arizona, I ran a check on the name Falstaff. I only found one in the region, and the individual had no connection. So I thought with law enforcement NCIC I would find something. One William Falstaff was in a Marion Penitentiary, a medium security federal prison in Illinois. My problem? Prisons are notoriously tight-lipped when it comes to giving out information about prisoners. I submitted a form requesting physical characteristics or scars and received a brief description that could have been anyone, but was rewarded when the description included a scar on the right upper thigh, fading and thought to have been caused by something when he was quite young. This was my boy, but I figured I'd taken the story about as far as I could. My last effort at communicating with him was a letter addressed to William Falstaff, care of Marion Federal Prison, 4500 Prison Road. I received a response 12 hours later, but not from William. A man of few words emailed me asking what my interest in William Falstaff was. Through several emails, I determined I was communicating with an agent of the FBI. William had escaped just days after my form was received requesting a physical description. I had an interesting story and a series of events that linked together, giving it credence, but nothing really solid. Dealing with phone calls and receiving emails does not truly make a story, but I just couldn't let it drop. I assumed that Billy's parents were deceased or at least out of the picture, but someone must have known him between the time he was discovered in Tennessee and his incarceration at federal prison. I started this new search with Child Protective Services, first in Arizona, then in Tennessee. All people that might have been involved were either retired or had passed away. All records have been archived and for the most part sealed. Dead end. I re-examined my progress since first scanning the FBI reports and realized that I'd been conducting what amounted to a missing person case. Surprised that I had put the knowledge that a doctor had removed a Civil War-era mini-ball from Billy's thigh out of my mind. It just seemed too weird. Still, I decided to take a look at children involved in the Civil War. It was a simple search to determine that preteens as young as 10 were often horse and wagon tenders and never really fought in any battles. I contacted the museum and the tourist center at the Shiloh Military Park for any information on children involved in the battle. Next, I placed ads in several newspapers in both Tennessee and Arizona asking for information on William or Billy Falstaff. I actually received a call a few days later from Virginia Falstaff Smith, Billy's sister. Jackpot, I thought. My first question was the most difficult. Did she know that Billy had escaped from prison? She laughed and said he hadn't escaped, that they'd lost him, that they were transferring him from Marion, a medium security prison, to a minimum security prison, and when the bus arrived, he wasn't on board. After a few awkward moments, I continued my questions. This was not a happy person. And after a few questions, she let me know in no uncertain terms that it was going to cost me to continue. I let her go. In 37 years, he must have had a girlfriend. I felt if I could put Billy's character together, I might be able to track him by employment. The problem was, what I did in Arizona, I had to do in Tennessee. A heavy knock at my door pulled me away from my computer. I checked the time. It was 6 o'clock. I opened the door and stood facing a young man of about 30 and could have been a salesman until he opened his mouth. I talked to Virginia, who said you might be willing to pay for information on her brother, he said. I didn't make the connection for a minute. We just stared at each other. Oh, Billy, I said. Yeah, what do you want to know? He said. I can't pay anything. He made a face, told me not to worry about it. How did you know Billy? He said, I knew who he was. He sat on the bus in front of me. You were being transferred to a minimum security facility, correct? Yeah, that's right. He was a real easygoing guy. Didn't talk much. So, I'd communicated with Billy's sister, who had to be paid for information on him. She did provide a picture of him just before he was arrested and incarcerated. Once again, though, I'd hit a dead end, even with the gentleman I'd been talking to came to my office in Ashland, Oregon. That is until I was visited by another individual, Tony Gale. He was Billy's cellmate and had been on the bus with Billy. He'd gotten my name from Billy's sister, just as the other gentleman had, with whom he had been in touch. The only thing I got out of Mr. Gale was that Billy always said that he was a child of the Civil War, and that when they were lined up ready to be checked onto the bus, he had told him that he'd never make it. After a number of phone calls, I determined that Billy was definitely checked onto the bus and that the bus made no stops and was manned by an experienced driver and 2 guards and was followed by an escort vehicle. Great. I was back to the question, where did Billy go? Before I let the story go, I decided to email a picture of Billy as a young man to the daughter of the doctor who extracted the mini ball from Billy's thigh. Again, I was ready to bag the story. Then I received a phone call from Escondido, California. It was the daughter of the doctor that had treated Billy. I was thunderstruck when she said she found him. In the Shiloh bookstore across from the Shiloh National Cemetery, on the back wall, a dozen photos of Union soldiers in various dress, including the drummer. She took a picture with her iPhone and emailed it to me as an attachment. There was no mistaking that the drummer was Billy, but the shocker was the name below the photo. It read Union drummer Billy Falstaff, killed at the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing, April 7, 1862. But she went one step further and visited the Shiloh National Cemetery and found his headstone. Billy Falstaff, born 1814, died 1862. That would have made him 48 years old, the same age as Billy Falstaff that vanished from the prison bus. All of this could be explained away as a series of coincidences, but what can't be explained is his picture in the bookstore and the headstone with his name in the Shiloh National Cemetery. Of course, there is also the Civil War era mini ball that was taken from the upper thigh of an 11-year-old boy found wandering in a cemetery 1,500 miles from where the FBI said he was abducted in Oatman, Arizona. And there you have the whole story of where did Billy go and all of the details, or most of the details, that I went through in order to get that story down. This is Kit Crum. I hope you've enjoyed Where Did Billy Go? And will continue to listen to Kit's Myths and Mysteries, stories of the strange and unexplained that have occurred in a world you thought you knew. Thanks for listening.